The courtroom was supposed to be quiet. Instead, it felt like every heartbeat inside that room was waiting to explode. Judge Ryan Cole, a man known for his cold stare and perfect record, sat behind the bench, tapping his pen like a ticking clock. His 6-year-old daughter Grace sat in the front row, swinging her little legs, her blonde hair tied in 2 nervous braids. Across from them stood Keisha Williams, a black social worker in her early 30s, calm, confident, eyes sharper than any lawyer in the room. She had been assigned to Grace's case after complaints of emotional neglect. Ryan hated the implication, hated that anyone would question how he raised his child. "Mr. Cole," Keisha said evenly, "this isn't about your authority. It's about what Grace needs." "My daughter has everything she needs," he snapped. "A house, education, discipline. Children don't survive on discipline," she replied softly. "They survive on love." The words hit harder than any verdict he'd ever given. The courtroom murmured. Cameras clicked. A few whispered, "She's brave to talk to him like that." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Are you accusing me of—" Before he could finish, a small voice interrupted. Grace had climbed down from her chair and was walking straight toward Keisha. Everyone froze. Grace tugged at Keisha's hand, her voice trembling but clear enough for every reporter and lawyer in the room to hear. "Can she be my mom?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Keisha blinked, caught between shock and heartbreak. Ryan's throat locked up. For the first time, the man who always had words found none. One sentence from a child had torn through the armor he'd worn for years. Keisha bent down slowly, her tone soft as sunlight. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm just here to help you and your dad understand each other." But Grace shook her head. "You make me feel safe." That one word, safe, shattered Ryan's pride into dust. He looked around the courtroom, feeling every stare, every judgment, every ounce of prejudice he'd lived by now turned against him. Keisha held Grace's hand tighter, steady but respectful, her eyes saying what her lips didn't. "This is what love looks like, the thing you forgot existed." If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. Judge Ryan Cole sat alone in his office long after everyone else had left. The courtroom lights were off, but that single moment, his daughter's voice echoing, "Can she be my mom?" kept replaying like a curse he couldn't silence. On his desk lay a framed photo of his late wife, Brooke. She'd been gone 3 years now. Car crash, late winter, ice on the road. Since then, Ryan had turned his grief into armor, hiding behind law books and procedure. The man who once believed in mercy had become a man who only trusted control. A knock at the door broke the silence. Keisha Williams stepped in, holding her notepad and calm like a shield. "I should have called first," she said, voice polite but firm. "But I needed to speak with you before tomorrow's review hearing." He gestured stiffly toward a chair. "You said enough in court today." "I didn't mean to embarrass you," she replied. "But you're missing what Grace is trying to say." Ryan exhaled sharply. "You think one moment of emotion defines my parenting? She's 6. Keisha met his eyes. "She's 6 and already scared to speak around you. That's not emotion, Judge. That's silence. And silence is what destroys children first." He hated how calm she sounded, how certain. "You don't know me," he muttered. She smiled slightly. "I don't have to. I've worked with men just like you, powerful, respected, and terrified of being human." Her words hit deeper than he expected. For a moment, he almost admired her, the way she stood there, unshaken by his status. Most people shrank under his authority. She didn't. He tried to regain control. "You think you can walk into my courtroom and lecture me about parenting?" "I think I can remind you that parenting isn't a courtroom," she said. "You don't win it. You feel it." The words lingered like a verdict he didn't want to hear. Keisha gathered her papers and stood. "Tomorrow's report will reflect what I saw today. A child reaching for love, and a father too proud to catch her." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You have a chance to change that before it's too late." The door closed softly behind her, leaving Ryan staring at the photo of Brooke again. his wife's smile frozen in time, his daughter's tears fresh in his mind. He poured himself a drink, but didn't touch it. For the first time in years, the judge who sentenced others was finally the one on trial. The next afternoon, Keisha Williams arrived at Judge Ryan Cole's home for her scheduled welfare visit. The mansion was spotless, marble floors, glass staircase, shelves lined with law awards. But it didn't feel alive. It felt like a courtroom pretending to be a home. Grace ran to the door before Ryan could stop her. "Miss Keisha," she said, hugging her legs with the kind of joy Ryan hadn't seen in months. Keisha smiled warmly. "Hey, sweetheart. I just came to see how you're doing." Ryan's voice cut through, cold and measured. "You're early." She turned slightly toward him. "And you're still wearing the same frown from yesterday. Should I come back later?" He said nothing, only motioned for her to enter. The sound of Grace's laughter filled the hallway as Keisha sat beside her on the living room carpet, helping her draw with colored pencils. The child's drawings were messy, stick figures, hearts, suns, and one dark cloud floating above a small house. "What's this one?" Keisha asked gently. Grace shrugged. "That's when Daddy yells." Ryan froze near the doorway, his heart tightening. Keisha didn't glance back at him. She just nodded softly. "You're very brave for showing me, Grace." Grace's little fingers traced the drawing. "Mommy used to say it's okay to cry. Daddy says crying is weak." Keisha spoke softly, her tone warm but firm. "Crying isn't weak. It's how strong people make room for love again." For the first time, Ryan couldn't look away. He saw how easily his daughter opened up to this woman, how safe she felt. That safety didn't come from money or walls. It came from presence, something he'd forgotten how to give. Later, as Grace napped on the couch, Ryan walked Keisha to the door. The air between them was tense, full of words neither wanted to say. "You've made quite an impression," he said quietly. "She just needed someone to listen," Keisha replied. "That's all most kids ever need." He folded his arms. "You think I don't listen?" She met his gaze. "I think you hear what fits your world and mute what doesn't." The truth stung. Before leaving, she looked around at the pristine furniture, the silent hallway, the empty picture frames with no recent photos. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "why a house this beautiful still feels lonely?" Ryan didn't answer. The door closed behind her with finality he didn't expect. Outside, Keisha exhaled into cool evening air. Inside, Ryan sat alone, hearing his daughter's small voice echo in his mind. "You make me feel safe. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe." A week later, the city courthouse was crowded for a high-profile custody review. Judge Ryan Cole sat silently in the audience this time, suspended, stripped of his authority until the investigation concluded. Across the room stood Keisha Williams, now testifying as Grace's social worker, her voice calm and unshaken. Reporters whispered, cameras clicked, and protesters outside shouted about corrupt systems and racial bias in child welfare. Ryan's jaw stayed tight, but his heart was chaos. He hated being on this side of the room, the side where judgment came for him. When Keisha took the stand, her tone was pure professionalism, but her eyes carried warmth. "I don't believe Mr. Cole is an unfit father," she said. "I believe he's a broken one, and broken people can heal if they're willing to listen." Murmurs spread through the court. Ryan looked up confused. Why defend him? Why not destroy him while the world watched? Before he could process it, the protest outside grew louder, the chants turning ugly. "Send her back!" someone screamed from the crowd. Moments later, chaos erupted as a group of men shoved through the courthouse doors, waving signs and shouting slurs. Security rushed to block them, but one protester broke free and threw a glass bottle toward the bench, right where Grace was sitting beside a clerk. Ryan's body froze for half a second, until Keisha moved first. She lunged forward, shielding Grace with her body as the bottle shattered against the floor beside them. The courtroom gasped. Reporters screamed. Flashbulbs burst like lightning. Keisha held Grace tight, her voice trembling but steady. "It's okay, baby. You're safe." I've got you. Ryan's chest ached as he rushed to them, pushing through chaos. The men were dragged out by officers, but the damage had been done. Cameras captured everything. A white judge paralyzed by fear, while a black woman risked her life for his daughter. That night, every news station replayed the footage. Headlines read, "Black social worker protects judge's daughter during racist attack." Judge Cole's silence under fire. Ryan didn't sleep. His phone buzzed with messages, reporters, colleagues, old friends, all asking the same question. How does it feel to be saved by the woman you once looked down on? He stared at Grace sleeping on the couch, her small hand gripping Keisha's scarf she'd left behind. He realized something he'd never said out loud. It wasn't shame that burned him anymore. It was gratitude and guilt for ever thinking he was above her. The courthouse buzzed with whispers long before the hearing began. Journalists filled the benches, cameras lined the walls, and the same man who once ruled from behind the gavel now stood in the witness box. Ryan Cole, suspended judge, father, and for the first time in his life, a man being judged by his own system. Across from him sat Keisha Williams, her arm still wrapped from the glass injury during the riot, eyes steady and unbroken. She wasn't there as a victim. She was there as the voice of truth. The presiding commissioner cleared her throat. "Ms. Williams, please describe the events that led to your involvement with Mr. Cole's child." Keisha spoke with quiet strength. "Grace Cole came under my supervision after repeated reports of emotional neglect. But what I found wasn't cruelty, it was emptiness. A child trying to fill a void that discipline couldn't fix." The room went still. Reporters stopped typing. Ryan looked down, ashamed, but her next words lifted his head. "Mr. Cole isn't an unfit father," she continued. "He's a man who forgot how to love out loud. That's not corruption, that's human." A soft murmur swept through the courtroom. For the first time, Ryan saw not judgment in her eyes, but grace, the kind his daughter carried in her name. Then the conversation shifted. A second witness, a former clerk, took the stand trembling. "There's something else," she said. "The department tried to bury reports of bias, targeting black social workers who challenged white officials. Ms. Williams wasn't the first they silenced." Gasps filled the room. Files were produced, emails, signatures, all pointing toward a deeper rot in the system. Ryan's blood ran cold. He had signed off on some of those documents years ago without reading the fine print. He stood abruptly. "That's enough," he said, voice trembling. "She's telling the truth." All eyes turned toward him. Ryan faced the court. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about a system that protects power and punishes compassion. If I lose my title for admitting that, so be it." Keisha's eyes glistened, not with pity but pride. For the first time, the man who built walls around his heart was breaking them down in public. The commissioner nodded. "This hearing will proceed to ethics review. But Mr. Cole, your honesty will be noted." As the gavel fell, Ryan exhaled slowly, not as a judge, but as a father finally learning what justice really meant. He glanced at Keisha. She smiled faintly, mouthing a single word. Finally, weeks passed. The courtroom lights had dimmed, but the story of the racist judge redeemed still lived on in every newspaper and talk show. Ryan Cole was officially disbarred, his gavel gone, reputation in ruins. Yet for the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't name. Maybe it was peace. Maybe it was the cost of becoming human again. At a small cafe on the east side of town, Keisha Williams found him sitting alone by the window, watching the city move like nothing had changed. "You're hiding," she said, pulling up a chair. "I'm resting," he replied. "That's new for me." She smiled faintly. "You lost everything, but you gained a daughter who finally laughs." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "She asks about you every night." "I miss her too," Keisha admitted. "But I needed to give you space to be her father, not her case." Ryan nodded slowly. "You know, I spent years thinking the law could fix people. Turns out it's just words on paper. You fixed her. You fixed me." Keisha leaned back, crossing her arms. "Don't make me your redemption story, Judge. I'm not here to save you. I'm here because Grace deserves a world where her father isn't afraid to hold her hand in public. even when the world stares. Her words hit him harder than any verdict. He exhaled deeply, looking out the gray sky. You're right. I'm done hiding from the world and from what I owe you. Later that evening, the three of them met again, Ryan, Grace, and Keisha, at the small city park where Brooks Memorial Bench stood. Grace ran ahead, laughing as she tossed breadcrumbs to pigeons. Keisha stood beside Ryan quietly. She's not scared anymore, Keisha said softly. She shouldn't be, Ryan replied. Not with you in her life. Keisha turned, a little startled. With us in her life, she corrected. He nodded slowly. You know, Brooke used to say people come into our lives for two reasons, to test us or to teach us. You did both. For the first time since losing his wife, Ryan smiled without guilt. Grace came running back, holding a small drawing in her hands. It showed three hands, one white, one brown, and one small child hand, holding a red heart together. Grace grinned. This is our family. Ryan knelt down beside her, voice breaking. Yeah, baby, it is. He looked up at Keisha, his eyes finally free of pride. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't even see myself. Keisha reached out, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. That's what love does, Ryan. It opens eyes that were never blind, just afraid. Spring came early that year. The courthouse steps that once echoed Judge Ryan Cole's authority now felt like a different kind of stage, one where humility stood taller than power. He wasn't your honor anymore. He was just Ryan, volunteering 3 days a week, giving free counsel to families who couldn't afford lawyers. The same man who once ruled with arrogance now listened like every story mattered. Inside a nearby family courtroom, a small ceremony was taking place. Grace Cole, now 7, sat between Ryan and Keisha Williams, smiling nervously as the clerk read the guardianship approval. By order of the court, the judge announced, Keisha Williams is hereby granted legal guardianship of Grace Cole. A hush fell. Ryan closed his eyes, exhaling through a trembling smile. Keisha reached across the table, squeezing his hand. You okay? He nodded. I'm proud. She deserves someone strong. Someone real. Grace leaned over and hugged him tight. You're still my daddy. He laughed through tears. Always, baby. Always. The clerk handed Ryan a pen, the same kind he'd used to sign hundreds of verdicts, but this one felt heavier than all of them combined. He signed the papers slowly, each stroke a release of everything he once was. As he finished, he whispered, Thank you. Keisha looked at him, eyes soft. For what? For saving both of us, he said. You just did it without a gavel. Reporters waited outside, but Ryan didn't care. He walked hand in hand with Grace and Keisha down the courthouse steps. Not as a symbol, not as a scandal, but as something the world rarely shows. Change that actually happened. Grace looked up at them. Can we go for ice cream now? Ryan chuckled. That's the best verdict I've ever heard. They laughed. The sound warmed human and new. That night, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Ryan stood alone for a moment. He watched Keisha and Grace ahead of him, walking together, laughter carrying through the evening breeze. And in that quiet second, he realized something simple but sacred. Love doesn't erase the past, it rewrites it. He took a deep breath, stepped forward, and joined them, not as a judge, not as a man trying to prove anything, but as someone finally free. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.